Welcome to NREI's Common Area Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the award-winning editorial staff at nreionline.com. Let's jump right into this week's podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Common Area with your host, David Bodamer. Today, David has a special guest, and that is Wendy Mann. David, how are you today?
I'm doing all right today. How are you this week?
Oh, fantastic. And I'm excited because you've got Wendy almost in studio. I know we're still pretty far apart, but why'd you bring Wendy on the show today?
So Wendy Mann is the CEO of the CRE Network, which is one of the main associations in the industry. Let her talk more about what they do, but particularly wanted to have a conversation because they do this study that they just published a new version of that looks at gender and diversity and inclusion within the industry, and just it couldn't be more timely. So I wanted to be able to talk to her about that. So Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
And yeah, just for any, I think a lot of our listeners probably are aware of your organization, but if you just wanted to take a second to talk about what it is that the group does.
Sure. I'll give you a brief overview. CRE Network stands for Commercial Real Estate Women Network, and we are a membership organization open to anyone. I will say we have 12,000 members. Of those 12,000 members, 4% are men, and then the 96% are women. And we were founded 31 years ago, back in the 80s, when women were just getting into commercial real estate as a profession and were struggling because they had no voice at the table and no seat at the table, in fact. And they felt that if they worked together and supported one another and did business deals with and for one another, that they could actually make an impact. And so we were founded initially for women to give and get business for one another and to one another, and blossom from there. So now our organization, we have 12,000 members in North America and a global affiliate in the UK. And we have 77 chapters that we established our own organization at the chapter level is in all various markets throughout the United States and in Canada. And the four primary pillars of our work still remain a business network, first and foremost. And we have women doing and talking about deals and giving and getting business to and for each other on our online community every day. We have our second pillar is leadership skills development, developing the best women leaders in the business. And CRE does that through a number of training programs we offer throughout the year and at their local chapter level. In addition to that, we are conducting research. We're the only organization globally that focuses on women and diversity and inclusion in the industry. And we're very proud of the fact that this was a twinkle in someone's eye back in 2005. And this year is our 15 years of data is now available on the progress of women. And then fourth and finally is we are focused on career outreach and developing the next generations of women in the industry. And we do that through programs that our chapters offer at the high school and university level in the local markets, because we can't advance women in commercial real estate if we don't have women. So we are committed to building a diverse talent pipeline for the industry. So that's basically it. In addition, the only thing I would say other than that is that we also have a 501c3 charitable foundation, which also supports the research piece and career outreach. In addition, we do provide 25 scholarships of $5,000 each year to young women in the industry who are in their undergrad or graduate programs in commercial real estate. And over the course of our 30 years, we've actually given away over $1.2 million to young women. And we're very proud of that.
Well, thank you for that. Well, and I mean, it's safe to say that a very active group and contributing to the industry and in all of these ways. So it's just great. It's a great organization. And I like when we have the opportunity to write about it and then seeing in particular this study that you referenced.
Sure.
This is just came out with the latest version of this. You talk to, as part of this, it's it's such a comprehensive study. I think you talked to almost 3,000 people within the industry to get the findings. So it's a very representative. It's just very representative and sample with all these insights that get down by job title, geography, et cetera, that provide this just this really invaluable, I think, look at what the state of the industry is. So I'm just kind of curious if you could start off just saying, as you put this together this year, and I think especially like I'm saying that it seems especially timely, just given the broader conversations that we're having in the United States and in the business world about diversity and inclusion and taking it more seriously. So this couldn't come at a better time to kind of like to gauge where we are as an industry and where we need to go. So I'm just kind of curious from just the top level, what were some of the good and bad things that turned up in this version of the research?
Yes, so we've released the study on September 2nd, so it's fresh. And I would just want to acknowledge that we work with the MIT School of Real Estate on the study, and so they have been very good with all the data collection and analysis. But the goals of the study were to benchmark the progress of women in the industry. And for the first time ever, David, we collected information and data on the Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the industry, both men and women. And that has never been done in our industry before. So we are excited that we're setting a benchmark here and now in 2020 so that we can go forward and look at that progress in that area of diversity as well. We wanted to explore the culture, workplace culture, and open up some issues around inclusion and belonging, as well as provide information to companies and managers about their values and about the values and priorities of their company or their employees. And so all of these things were part of our goal. And what we found out was that on the upside, I'm going to start with the good news. On the upside, one of the really nice things that jumped out at me was that for the first time ever, we've seen an increase in women in brokerage. So it grew by 6%. And so I bring that up because that is something that SAOR has been working on a long time. And they served as one of our underwriting partners this year as well on the study. And so I was glad to see that there was some progress made in that area. In addition to that, I think the other area that I would mention that I think is interesting is really the importance and satisfaction areas is that women and men both agree that job enjoyment is their number one priority, and that has not changed over time. But all the other information, I want to be honest with you, it was very disappointing, the lack of progress. And so I'd like to hit some high notes on some data that were disappointing to us, I would say. And I hope that this is a call to action for leaders in the industry to say, this is not acceptable. And one of those is, just so you know from the dynamics, we did have a response rate that was fair. It was 34% higher than it has been in past years. And that's because we invited the entire industry, all the other industry organizations to join with us in distributing. But what we found out is that according to this study, that women occupy 36.7% of jobs in commercial real estate. And that percentage has remained the same over the last 15 years. It's in this range of 35 to 37%. Women are still less likely to reach top positions in commercial real estate. And in fact, we saw a decline this year of 5% in women in SVP, managing, and director partner level roles, which is really disappointing with all the work we've done the last several years. And then women represent just 9% of positions in the C-suite in the last 3 studies. So that has remained stagnant. In terms of the aspiration goals, last study we started asking what level of leadership that women aspired to. And at the time, only 28% of women aspired to the C-suite. Now, in this study in 2020, 32% of women aspired to the C-suite and 43% of men. So both of those have grown about 5% between this study and the last one, which is encouraging to see that more women are aspiring. What's interesting about it is that if you cross-tab out the data, you can see that the women who are aspiring to C-suite roles are the under 40 group. Women over 40 did not respond that they have aspirations to go higher to the C-suite role. We did have a higher response rate this time from women who were, I think, 40 and under, which is good. We think that is an indicator that there are more young women coming into the profession. And so we'll see some shifts in some of the cultural questions as well. The biggest thing that probably was disturbing for us was the fact that the overall compensation package, including salaries, bonuses, and commission, the pay gap there was 34%.
Yeah.
And that's an increase from 2015 of 11%. So I'll stop there. and see if anything struck you, or if you want to talk about something else related.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are some of the things that definitely caught my eye in reading
Mm-hmm.
the report. I found, I think, in terms of the compensation, do you have any sense of why the compensation has not improved, or in fact gotten worse? I thought it was one, or and related to that, I thought one of the interesting insights was this on the question of commission structures
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not women in the industry have generally been a little more averse to having their compensation as tied to commission because of extending other factors, like actually having access to the kinds of deals that would be more lucrative. So
Yeah.
like so it seems like it almost speaks to an interrelated set of issues around, like, okay, so if you're in the industry but you're dealing with, is it a boys network, or is it a question of networking or getting access to these kind of things? If you don't have that, then you want your compensation structure to be more heavily on salary, less on commission, and therefore does that just create like this just difficulties for moving up in the future,
Yeah.
if that makes sense?
Well, it does. And I think there are several factors that we have surmised could play into this pay gap, which one is bias for sure, still exists. The barriers, including hiring practice, I mean, their hiring practice could be part of it. And part of it could be the women's reluctance to negotiate better deals from themselves. But I'm not sure if women know going into a commission-based job that they're not going to have access. I see a younger group of professionals coming up in our business who have a very entrepreneurial spirit. And I think they are more self-confident. And I think that perhaps is why we saw the 6% increase in women in brokerage, because there's another level of confidence. And the younger women are part of a generation that feel equal to men in all ways. And I don't think that they see any barriers. So, I think historically, yes, we have seen women who are less able to or willing to negotiate those deals. But we also see women being kept from the better projects and the bigger deals once within a company. And I think that probably has something to do with it. But I think, over the years, I think continued bias and barriers and hiring practices could definitely be part of it within companies. And so when you talk about how do you address that, or what's it going to take to change that, is companies need to, number one, is the compensation model they're using, whether it's commission, fully or partially, or bonus system, whatever it is it an outdated system? We think that there's probably a better way to attract, if you really want diversity and inclusion, there's a better way to attract and keep women and women of color in the organizations. And that is understanding what matters to them and giving them some of those things that will increase their career satisfaction and make them better producers. And part of that is an equal deal, equal opportunities for deals, equal compensation package. And until those things happen, and also we've called on companies and will continue to do so for pay parity studies, do a study internally and look, because I will guess that most of the C-suite doesn't really know the disparity between the salaries within their own company. And we've seen other corporate models like companies like Salesforce and Adobe, who have done and continue to do ongoing pay parity tests and have committed to that, and it does work. So I think there's a way forward, and I think that we can close the gap and hopefully someday eliminate it. But I think that starts at the top, and the willingness to take a hard look at the way things are right now, and whether or not, number one, there needs to be a new compensation model, or number two, you need to adjust salaries to create equality.
Yeah, I think I was also struck in the way that that was broken down. I think you mentioned that the overall earnings gap was 34%, but then like by salary it's only 10%, and then the
Correct.
bonus gap was like 56%. So
Correct.
that
Yeah.
was fairly
Yeah.
I mean, like a very jarring to see
Yeah.
that that's how that number breaks down in terms of compensation type.
Yeah. I'd love to go to some additional statistics that dig further into that, David, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely.
So one of the things that David's pointing out, which is really important, is that overall gap is 34% for all women. But when it comes to breaking it out, white women earn 10% less than men in base salaries. The gap for Asian women is 14% and Black women is 15%. And for Hispanic and Latinx women, it's actually 20%. So that's on salary alone. And that's for people if you're in equal jobs, right? And then
Right.
if you look at just bonuses and commission, white women earn 56% less than men. Can you imagine that? If a man is getting 100K, a woman's getting 50,000 on that deal. But the gap is wider for Black women. It's 71%. For Asian women, 73%, and Hispanic Latinx women, 74%. And I believe that for the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color is just an enormous, an unbelievable gap in the commission and bonus structure that really is unconscionable in many ways. And I think that needs to be addressed for sure. And we need to make sure that as we're looking at diversity and inclusion going forward, and you're right, this broader social conversation has really raised this. I'm proud that we made the decision last May to include questions around this because we didn't know the timing would be what it is, but it's so impactful right now when you have this data and it opens your eyes to really such a troubling gap for women of color. So I think that's important.
Do you have a sense of how those percentages compare to other financial industries? Like, is it as similar to like what you would find in wealth management industries or that kind of thing? Or do you know if it's any better or worse?
Yeah. So I don't know for sure, but my guess is I don't know that there's any industry where women are actually winning at the
Right.
salary gap. So is it worse? Possibly. I mean, there's a lot of money in financial services, financial management, wealth management. But I think, and I think I was looking in the report because there is a piece on the finance, women in finance. So I can tell you that women in finance, well, yeah, I can look at, so David, I don't know for sure on the overall financial area overall, but I can tell you in real estate for finance, the gap is 13%. So for women, women make 103,000 in finance, and men make 120,000 based on, that's excluding salaries and bonus.
Yeah.
That's just
That's
salary.
just salary.
And then when I was just looking at the data for Black women, their difference related to just salary is $17,000 gap. Now, interestingly enough, in finance for Asian women make 7,000 more. So that's an interesting. But Hispanic Latinx women, $29,000 less. So the gaps. I mean, I those numbers are just so big that it's so disturbing to me. But so the gaps are there, and will continue to be as long as we're not taking a hard look at that. So
yeah, so I guess that's then the question, which is, okay, seeing this stuff is kind of a rude reminder of the way things are, and we are at this point in the industry where maybe the kind of conversations that have happened in the past and not advanced maybe can move more forward into action. So what are the report did have some points at the end about like pieces of advice as to try to address some of these things. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
To increase DEI in commercial real estate, I think leaders, we must continue to understand the issues presented in the benchmark study and address them as a business imperative. So these things are no longer a nice to have, but a business imperative. And when I say that, David, what I mean is what's happening in our business world, and not just in real estate, but in our world altogether, is that your partners and customers are demanding, they want to work with companies that share their values for diversity and inclusion. And so you're hearing, like, kind of external of your company, there's pressure coming in from the sides of, my customers and my clients or partners want me to be doing this. And then you have employees from the bottom up saying, look, if you want me to work for your company, I want you to share my values on diversity and inclusion. And, the millennials, they vote with their feet, and they're going to walk out the door if they work for a company that doesn't. And then you have the top down. So if you can kind of visualize this box with pressures coming from the sides and the bottom, the CEO needs to be the pressure that comes from the top and really pushes change down. There has to be responsibility, accountability, and commitment. So top leaders need to be invested, involved, measured, and held accountable. And this is an ongoing thing. It's not a one-off, we're going to tweak this, and this, and it'll be done. But it's an ongoing commitment of the leadership, and that means the CEO. You need to, number two, hire we encourage companies to hire an external consultant that can recognize the gaps, barriers, unconscious bias, and then take action to overcome it. Whether that is changing your policies, changing governance, changing hiring practices, and or giving ongoing training and requiring anyone who's in leadership to have some kind of bias training, because there's no doubt that that's an important piece. But also then putting accountability measures in so that the companies can say, here's what we said we were going to do, here's what we've done, and here's the result. And then finally, I think there's conduct a pay parity test, and do it regularly. Comprehensive bias training is required. And then partner with Crew Network. We want to make change, and our agenda is going to be this agenda. And we want to partner with companies to help change the industry and make this profession attractive and equitable for everyone who wants to be here. And I think when you see that change, you'll see more diversity, and you'll see more commitment from young women and all people of color to be part of this, because it's not just about recruitment, it's about retention and advancing diverse groups of people once they're in your company. And that takes time, and it takes ongoing commitment. So those are some things we would recommend. And I always like to include this statement from one of the early suffragettes. She said, deeds, not words, which means everybody talks a good game, but are we actually following that with the deeds or the actions that are required to make those words a reality? And that's what I would call on all executive leadership to take this study in hand with your team and say, what do we need to do and where can we do better?
And here's another question just from our perspective, as also like thinking about the role that, National Real Estate Investor, we're one of the media brands that's focused on this industry. There's a few of us, but what can also we be doing as platforms in this industry to helping foster the conversation or covering what's happening in a better way? I just feel like I've been covering this industry for 20 years, and we do just being like critical of ourselves. Like we occasionally write about what's happening with recruitment, or from time to time we write about this. We also did a study, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, a survey about occasionally we've done surveys within the industry, not quite as in depth as the one that you've done, but also tried to take a look. But I've been trying to also sit down for the past couple of months and figure out what is the role that we play in this, as part of writing about what's happening in the industry. So I don't know if you have any advice or thoughts for us as well.
I think telling the stories is really important. I think there tends to be clickbait where you tell the bad stories, but I think it's also identifying the places and the companies and the people that are making a difference and are making change, because they set the best practices and the examples that the rest of the industry will follow. And if you recall the story that on State Street that was done several years ago, when they put a stake in the ground and said, look, we're not going to work with partners anymore that don't have women on their board. That was a big deal. And there have been more companies since then. So I think the more we can report those stories and share those corporate stories about what companies are doing or what success they've had, they become shining lights and beacons for others to follow. In addition to that, I also think that the stories about women's success, people of color in the industry, and their success or changes that have happened, that it's granting them more success. So I think keeping that in the limelight is really important, both the challenges and the change that's happening as it happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely take that to heart. And certainly outside of this conversation we're having here, if there are things, examples, anecdotes, highlights that that your organization wants to share with us, we're happy to cover it in any of our formats, but whether it's the stories on the website or conversations such as this. So
Yeah.
I certainly hope we can continue to be part of chronicling what's happening.
Yeah. Well, I would love that, David, and thank you for the offer. That would be great to have a continuing dialogue and have some focus and feature on some of the women in the industry. In fact, we have distinguished leaders that we identify women in the industry who are at the top, and talk with them. And maybe those are some women that would be suited to your podcast and or some other type of content. But they would be a place I would definitely start. But I also think I find it so fascinating and interesting, the young women's perspective as they're coming up and what they view as barriers and what they don't see at all as barriers. Whereas my generation, I'm at the tail end of the baby boom. I think we had more struggles where they don't see it, even though it may be there, and they don't see it as that, at least not yet. They haven't run into it. So maybe taking a look at both the younger generation, the millennial perspective. And frankly, I have to say, I mean, the millennials are very much value-based human beings. And if a company does not share their values, that's a talent war that you're not going to win without the D&I values. So I appreciate the offer. Happy to work forward with that and continue the dialogue for sure. Thank you.
All right. So we've been talking for about half hour. So this is usually around, we try to kind of cap these. So but can you just tell people where, if they haven't seen the study, how they can get their hands on it?
Sure. If you are interested in more details, and I hope you are, and I hope you'll share this with your companies, please go to crewNetwork.org and click over to our research page, and you will find all of our studies there available for free for download, or you can contact our office and we would be happy to send hard copies to you and or your C-suite.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for talking me through all this. It was extremely valuable for me personally, just to get a chance to discuss some of this stuff. And I hope, like I said, that we continue to try to be part of the process within this industry.
Well, I appreciate it. And feel free to reach out to us if you're looking for some stories. And I'll keep in mind, I'll share that with Laura, our Chief Marketing Officer, and make sure that she looks for those opportunities as well.
Wendy and David, this was fantastic. I learned a ton. I really didn't like a lot of those numbers that you put out there, Wendy. As a father and a grandfather of a daughter and granddaughter, that's a little bothersome. But you're out there. You're in the trenches. You're working towards some equality and, full equality, not some equality. Let's be honest. Full equality.
Full equality.
Full equality, yeah. And so I appreciate you being on the podcast as well. David, you always get the best guests. I just love that. So again, both of you.
My pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And the last thank you, of course, goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Common Area Podcast with David Bodamer. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when David comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your colleagues. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at NREI, this is Eric Johnson inviting you back in 2 weeks for all the stories that matter to you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Common Area Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of NREI or Informa. The content has been made available for information and educational purposes only.